Welcome to the Crafting Character Podcast. Steve Carter here in association with my good friends at CDF Capital. I'm so excited to kick off 2021 with this podcast and especially with this guest, my friend Gene Appel. What we're going to do, like we typically do, is we spend a moment getting to hear the sound of just a message from Gene that he actually gave in 2020. And I want you to hear this because what he details and unpacks is this flywheel around fear and around faith. And then we'll come back and have an honest and human conversation about the craft, the art of preaching, and how we want to be the kind of people where our character always leads the way. Hear this.
Gang, I stand before you today and say, I just don't get the fear-filled, sarcastic, worst-case scenario crowd. This is just unproductive anytime you're in a crisis. And just so you know, I'm throwing myself in with Moses, and I'm saying I am in the fear not, stand firm, believing that with God's help, the greatest days are in front of us mode. What mode are you in? This is a time for Eastside to keep being the church. This is a time to keep doing what God's called us to do, to make disciples who pursue God, who build community, and unleash compassion. We are not going to shrink back or run or hide. We are going to seize this moment and advance God's mission through Eastside. I believe that's exactly what God wants to do. Friends, this is the mode we've all got to be in, not just as a church, but in our personal lives, in our families, in our personal faith stories. Tomorrow, you will write a new chapter in your story. And I just wonder why any of you would choose to write your story with a fear-based pen when you could be writing it with a faith-based pen. Why would you get all afraid and sarcastic and expend all kinds of energy on worst case scenarios? Today, I want to call you to a better plan. I want to call you to the Moses plan. I call you to the fear not, stand firm, expect God's help plan. I call you with the strength of God's Holy Spirit to say, with God's help, I will stand firm and let go of fear, because I have a God who will never let go of me. I serve and love a God who did the Passover miracle, the part the Red Sea miracle, the manna from heaven miracle, the water from a rock miracle, the Christmas miracle, the Good Friday miracle, the Easter Sunday resurrection miracle, a God who has been pulling off water parting stuff all throughout history. Why wouldn't I believe that he will part the waters for me? Amen?
Well, Gene, I loved that message. I actually listened to it twice. Give our listeners just a sense of what that talk was, because it kind of came right out of the COVID season. But yeah, give a little background on that, if you wouldn't mind.
And thanks for the privilege to be on Crafting Character. Love you, Steve, and
Thanks,
honored
bud.
to be here. Well, so that message was delivered exactly 2 days after we made the decision. We had to pull the plug and cancel services and COVID-19. So it was a real scramble even to put the message together, because everything changed on a Thursday.
Wow.
And I gave that message on a Saturday night. And of course, the whole world had shifted. I mean, those of us who love college basketball,
Yes.
the NCAA had just been canceled. And, I honestly I never imagined in my life that I would ever make an announcement that we won't be gathering because of a global pandemic. I've been in ministry for 40 years, and that had never crossed my radar. And so I was just trying to think, okay, the natural response we're all going to go to right now is fear. And God, maybe you've put me in a place right now. I need to call people to a higher place. And so I was scrambling, like every pastor was in those 2 days, to figure out what do I what do I call people to? And I just used the title that weekend, fear or faith, question mark, kind of what are we going to choose?
Wow. Well, and what I loved again just about that was I think so often when my fear kicks in, how easy it is to go to those places of sarcasm or just kind of those doomsday kind of stories that just almost you can't control them. They it's like a snowball effect. They just build and build. And I just thought the way that you articulated this, and again, this is one of the reasons why I wanted you on this podcast is because there are people, and I think I'm more of just a teacher who attempts to lead from time to time. But you, I feel like, are so strategic. The way that you lead through your teaching, and I remember the first time I listened to you, man, this was 20 plus years ago. While you were still senior pastor at Central, and I remember I would get some tapes of your talks, and I just listened, and then obviously, you spent 5 years at Willow, and I would listen to you there. But there was always this sense that you were taking not just an idea somewhere, but you were taking a church and you were moving people down the road. And I've just always respected it. And I just felt that at the tail end of that talk, you did it once again. It's almost the staple of how you lead through your teaching. Talk about that. Is that something you just kind of innately have always had, or is that something that you've kind of grown into, or where did you first kind of learn to do that?
I mean, I think there's a couple different pieces to that. I think as I just look at my own gifting and my own wiring, as best as I can understand it, as best as others affirm in me, it feels like, when you look at the order of my spiritual gifts, that leadership is kind of at the top of that list, and teaching then is in a second place. So I think there's just a natural tendency that I have as a leader and as a teacher to mix those two things together and to be strategic about that. And then because I am a leader, we create ministry plans on 6-month increments at Eastside, where we're always looking out 6 months ahead and kind of feeling like, God, where do you want us to go? And, we talk about our purpose as a church of being pursue God, build community, and unleash compassion. So we're always looking at how can we advance one of those values at any given time, or a combination of those at any given time. And so my preaching calendar, I guess you could say, either informs our strategic plan, or our strategic plan informs my preaching calendar. And it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. Probably more so the strategic plan informs my preaching more so, but it can go either way. And of course, the week of this message that we listened to, that's the week all the plans went out the window.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
That's the week for people like me, or it's like, crazy. This is not the plan we had leading up to Easter, and this is not the strategy that we had. But I also knew that I needed to lead at that time, and it was important for our staff and our church to hear my voice as a shepherd. Yes. And a calming and a steadying voice.
What was so amazing too is, again, just like it almost felt like that message had been planned because it just felt so true to you. I mean, you told this personal story about a Matt Redman song coming out of a difficult season, and just even as you read those lyrics, I just was like, man, it just spoke to me. But I'm curious because I think there's many senior pastors and teaching pastors who listen to this podcast. And when you talk about your strategic calendar and in the ministry plans and the sermon calendar, can you walk us through how does that all kind of play out? If you're running in 6-month increments, how does that play out?
Well, let's pretend we're talking at a time that's not a COVID-19.
That's true. Yeah. 2019, take me back.
Plans go out the window. So hoping with vaccines on the horizon here for all of us, hopefully we're going to get back to a more normal sense. I kind of think of the ministry year, like in my mind, this is just how I've always programmed it. I think of as it starting in August.
Yeah.
And like that's the start of a new year. And in August, I think about the fact that, in good ways, people have had lots of distractions over the summer. They've had vacations, they've been to camp. They probably haven't been as engaged in kind of some of our church stuff as they would be other times of the year. So I always look at August as a time I want to re-engage the church family spiritually. And that this is a time to, not only get back to rather regular rhythms, but really challenge them in some of their spiritual practices and disciplines, et cetera. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've done a 21 days of prayer emphasis in the month of August that kind of coincides with that time. And I'll do a series. Like 2 years ago, I did a series called The Deep and was just walking through the first 4 chapters of the book of Acts. And this is the kind of church that we want to be. And these are the kind of values that we want to uphold. And, so oftentimes though, I'll be calling people back to our primary values of pursuing God and worship and why we value community and small groups and why we want to be the hands and feet of Jesus to unleash compassion. So we kind of re-engage in that. And I also use that as a time to start casting vision. We're going to re-engage ourselves spiritually so that in September, we're in a good posture that we can start reaching our friends and family evangelistically.
Yep.
And so I'll do a series in August that will re-engage the church family. That'll usually go through about Labor Day. Then that weekend after Labor Day, it's like, okay, now the next few weeks, we're going to be all about reaching our friends.
Gotcha.
And so I'll try to do a series then that has high interest or high felt need. Sometimes we'll have a special guest that weekend after Labor Day to kind of get some mojo going, give people another excuse to invite a friend or a family member with them. And then in October, then I'll try to start taking people on a deepening journey. So it's kind of like we re-engaged ourselves spiritually. We've reached our friends. Now, how do I help take those friends that you're reaching and challenge them to step across the line of faith? Maybe it's to move toward a small group, to engage in their spiritual life. And it would not be uncommon for us to have like a spontaneous baptism weekend sometime in October.
Yeah.
Kind of because that's fruit. And then in November, we usually move strategically into some things of caring for the marginalized, caring for the poor, some way of compassion initiative. Sometimes it'll be something global. Sometimes it'll be more local in our communities. And if we do local in November, we'll do something for global in the spring or vice versa.
Gotcha. And
so then, Christmas is not a great attended month for us, typically the month of December, but historically, and again, this year being an exception, Christmas services leading up to Christmas Eve become our greatest outreach of the year. We triple whatever our average attendance is those times. So then we're kind of look to start that cycle that I just described all over again in January. And what can we do to bring people back in January? What can we deepen them in February? How can we unleash compassion in March? And then we're at Easter. And I think every pastor in the world dreams, that because Easter is going to be great attended things, that there's going to be great evangelistic fruit after Easter. And I plan for that every year and rarely experience it. I play for it. I pray and plan. But it seems like, there's just that natural drop off after Easter. And of course, when Mother's Day hits, it's like that's the last hurrah.
Yes.
Something unique in my preaching calendar. I do try to address areas of biblical money management every year.
Okay. Yep.
And I kind of fell into an I don't think there's a bad time to do that, but I kind of fell into a pattern probably 8 years or so ago of doing a series like that in the month of June. Sometimes I'll do it in late May, early June, and I'll always do at least 3, if not 4 weeks on that subject matter. And what I like about that, the reason that's really grown is it's not a high outreach time for us as a church. So it is kind of a deepening time. Summer is traditionally a time where finances in a church can be hit hard. Yeah. And we experience just the opposite of that. Has been our experience since doing that. July giving becomes like December giving in our church. And so that's really a good thing. And the other thing I like about that is it's, if you do it in June, it's 6 months away from December. And in December, we usually do some kind of year-end giving emphasis that's over and above kind of thing. And so it puts those two things exactly 6 months apart. And it gives you two opportunities a year to address stewardship issues, like from a different angle and a different perspective. So that's kind of the cycle of a year.
Yep. Now, does your fiscal budget year, is that January through December, or is it
Our
July through?
Starts September 1. It's when
September 1. Okay. So it's a great piece as well as you guys prepare that for the ministry year.
Again, so we end our fiscal year strong by doing that way. We're positioned to start a new fiscal year strong in September.
So take me back. You're 25 years old and you step in your first senior pastor role at Central Christian in Vegas. How much of this did you have lined out from a liturgy standpoint, kind of a yearly calendar, or was it man, I don't know what I'm teaching? Because again, when I was at Willow, people would talk about how strategic you were. I mean, one of the series that you would do often, I heard, was homecoming for people to come back in August. And that was the first time that I started thinking about, man, wow, we got to really welcome people back in August. And again, just some of the decisions that you've made have shaped me in my understanding of a preaching calendar. But take me back to 25. What were you like stepping in your first senior pastor role for preaching calendar?
I could barely shave, and I still sounded like I'd been inhaling helium for 4 days when I preached. And that was quite an experience. I went into a church. It was a very traditional church at that time. So, I mean, we know what Central and Judd has done there today, but at that time, Central was a very traditional church. It was a church of about 400 people. And, I was 25 and the baby of the staff and the youngest person on the staff. And I had a strategic bent to myself then. And really, I mean, I led the first staff meeting the church had ever had. That's how unstrategic it had been prior to that. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit when it came to leadership. But I don't think I understood quite it was probably 2 or 3 years into that adventure that I started understanding how to attach my preaching to the strategic initiatives that we were doing as a church. My first year in Vegas, in fact, I don't regret this. I spent 35 weeks teaching through the book of Acts, as a 25-year-old. But that was kind of what the church needed at that time to help us think about what kind of church do we want to be and what has God called us to? And it was really formative for us as a church. And then I think it positioned us to be more strategic in the years ahead.
Yeah. Well, and you were there 18 years, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So when I think too about the strategic plan, as you think about, and you kind of have this roadmap, how early are you prepping for those ministry plans? If they're going to kick off in September, August, are you going away with key leaders in May? What does that look like for you? And how do you listen to that kind of strategic gut or the Spirit's leading?
Yeah. So that's evolved over the years for me. So when I was in Vegas, again, this would probably be after I got a year or two under the belt and started thinking more strategically. In the summer each year, I would try to plan out my preaching calendar for the entire next year. So that would kind of take me to August through June or something like that, and then take some vacation time in July. And of course, in those days, we were doing 2 different services a week. We had a church service on the weekend focused toward unchurched people and a service toward believers on midweek. And so I was planning both of those calendars and would kind of do it over the course of a year. I spent 5 years at Willow Creek, and in those days, we were kind of making it up 6 weeks at a time. People thought we were strategic, but it wasn't. And that was actually was frustrating to me, because I just think we do better work when we're planned out ahead, and it serves our teams well, and it serves the church well. So I've been at Eastside now. It was 12 years ago this last fall that I came, and we started within, I would say, my first 6 months at Eastside planning on 6-month cycles. And that's just worked for us. And so we keep it up. So for instance, This is how our cycle will go. In January, we'll do a 3-day retreat with our senior leaders. We'll do some reflection on like how the last 6 months have gone. How are we doing in these areas of pursuing God, building community, and unleashing compassion? What do we think are some of our opportunities moving ahead? And then we just kind of start calendaring each month. Like we'll do like February through August, let's say, in that particular cycle of planning. And we'll just start thinking about, okay, where's our on-ramp opportunities to really lift up the value of community? I know, for instance, this March, we're going to have a big local serving, local compassion emphasis that we're going to do. So that's going to play in. I'm already planning to do a series on the fruit of the Spirit that kind of leads into that, where we're, how do we work out these values of loving our neighbor and kindness and goodness and expressing some of those values. So we'll start with an executive team retreat. We'll have a couple of our other senior staff members outside of our executive team also speak into that. We would often meet with what we call our central teams. These are people across who serve all of our campuses relative to student ministries or children's ministries or worship ministries, et cetera. They'll spend an afternoon with us. Our campus pastors will spend a day with us during that time. And so we'll emerge with that time of a pretty good picture of what the next 6 months look like. And I'll either have some of my preaching plan already starting to reflect out of that, or I'm planning my preaching plan because of that. And, Mike Bro and I have served together, partnered together in one way or another for 28 years now. And Mike's on our teaching team. And so Mike usually joins us for those times too. And then he's got such a creative and great, he is, natural teaching gift, preaching gift right at the top of his gift mix. And Michael often shoot, a few series ideas together as a result of that, a lot of it, he's not even preaching, but he just helps our thinking on that.
I've always loved it when I've been around both of you, because the brotherhood, just iron sharpens iron. And, with you, I feel like I can see the vision and we're like taking strategic ground. And with Mike, I feel like I got a basketball in hand and some sweet tea and I'm sitting on a porch, it's just, but the two of you, the way that you both interact, I absolutely love it. And now here's an interesting thing, because the message we picked to kind of listen to, you had flexed. Like when you are strategic and you are planned out ahead, is there a couple times every year where you're like, no, we got to punt on this series, or does that rarely happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say it rarely happens. Yeah. I would say the ministry plans seldom get adjusted. 95% of the time we're able to move forward on that. The thing I likened this most to that I could in my kind of ministry journey was when 9/11 hit in 2001. And, I was in Vegas at the time and we had just kicked off a great fall, it was early September, you're all ready to make hay and evangelistic hay. And then that event happened that just absolutely shifted everything. And so all the plans went out the window, new plans were made, series were striked, new series were created to deal with the moment that we found ourselves in. And I would say that was the most, next to the COVID-19 situation, that's the time I recall most where things had to shift in a dramatic way.
Yeah. Now, what's that been like for you, because you typically have been so far out to now have to live in the present? Like, is it like in a new way, has that been, man, like this has changed my preaching in this COVID season, not being able to kind of lean on the plans and that the Spirit's leading on those retreats. Now it's just shifting. It feels like every week. I mean, we think about what 2020 was civil unrest, global pandemic. I mean, election. I mean, it's like every week it was just something different. Yeah. How did you live in that tension well?
What I've tried to do is to continue to be strategic, but do it in shorter time frames.
Wow.
So rather than look out at 6 months, I'm looking at 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And so, just as an example, last June, when we started thinking about, okay, when will we regather? And of course, at that time, we thought it would be sooner than it's been. Here we are in December, and we still haven't regathered in California. We've got some plans to do that soon, but we still hadn't regathered. I thought, by August, surely we will. So what we started doing as a staff, we put together, okay, what does our 8-week regathering plan look like whenever we pull the trigger?
Oh, yes.
So it wasn't date specific, but we put an 8-week plan together that said, okay, here's the weeks leading up to the regathering. Here's what's going to happen when we regather. Here's the series we're going to do when we regather.
Yep.
So we put that together. Now, I thought we would be pulling the trigger on that last August or September, but now we're going to pull the trigger on that series in January.
Yeah.
And so we planned that way. Last summer, as you know, we were, I was on a break most of the month of July, which felt good and really needed after the, just the demands of leading through what we've been through. And so, I'm just kind of praying and leading, okay, God, what's next? What does our congregation need now? And so, when I came back, I was deliberate, and I did a message called Where Do We Go From Here? And it was on the, because I think that's the question everybody was asking. And right out of Jeremiah, there's this passage where the Hebrews come to Jeremiah and they say, where do we go and what do we do? They'd just been through defeat. They'd just been in battle. They were, and I think that's how we all felt kind of emotionally. And so I kind of started with a vision cast. Hey, we're going, given what's going on in our land this summer, we need grace saturated unity because,
yes.
We see division everywhere. We need, vision focused strategy. We're going to be focused on mission. We're still called to fulfill the Great Commission. We may have to adjust methods, but our mission hasn't changed.
Right.
And something that doesn't ever change is Jesus-centered ministry. This is all about him. And so, I called people that. Then the following week, and I kind of cast vision for this and that, I went into a 3-part series called Living in the Age of Rage, and just dealing with all the, there was Scott McKnight wrote an article last summer that really captured my attention. I think it was in Christianity Today or on his blog or something like, when did it become okay to hate?
Yeah. Wow. Yep.
And that really prompted my thinking of, man, I don't like what goes on in me sometimes right now. I don't like what I see going on in our church family. And so I wanted to address that directly, because I just feel like because of the divisiveness that's happened within the body of Christ this year, it's really set us years back in our influence outside the body of Christ. And we got a lot of makeup work to do there.
Wow. Okay. This is super helpful. And I love that you kind of unpacked this teaching that you gave in August and then that 3-week series. Okay. So couple like rapid fire questions about this. First is, I've used this phrase as I'm describing you, strategic leader, strategic leader in your preaching. When you hear that, how would you define that?
Well, I always think about, we're taking people on a journey.
Yep.
There's a place we want them to go spiritually. I don't care where you are spiritually right now. I want to help you take your next step forward, wherever that is. That's what's important to me. And so when I sometimes refer to it as directional preaching, I'm trying to take people on a journey. I'm trying to move them forward. I'm trying to help them mature. And that might be, in some cases, I'm trying to get them to move from -10 in the level of their spiritual interest to, -8.
Yes.
Other times it's to get them across the line of faith. Sometimes it's really to move person deeply in their maturity. So that's when I think about strategic. It's strategic in helping people grow spiritually. It's strategic in helping them mature. It's not. To me, the end of the game is not about, did we achieve the church's strategic goals?
Right.
Those goals are only useful if they're helping us move people forward. I like looking at the number of people we have in small groups and thinking about how many we'd like to have, because I know if we can move that metric forward, it's going to mean that people are going to experience, church as it was meant to be in their life. They're going to experience Acts 2 community. So it's with that end in mind that helps me think strategically. It's not about building an organization. It's about building people.
Yes. And what I love too is, especially when you are around someone who has a gift that's it's just so hardwired in the way that God made them. And it's like, you probably don't even think about, but even as you were talking about this Jeremiah passage, you were talking about this directional, like, where are we going? Where are we taking people, And I love that when you like open up your Bible and you know that you're going to teach from, let's say Acts 4, is that just directional word constantly in your mind? Like, hey, this is where's this, what's this text saying? And now what am I going to actually invite the Eastside congregation to do or move, or are there other questions that are kind of pushing that direction ahead?
Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of other communicators do this too. A lot of times when I'm working on a sermon, I try to write down the names of, 5, 6, 8 people, like specific people, not generic demographic group people, but like people that I know. And so I write with them in mind, some who, like, maybe it's a person or a neighbor or a friend that I'm trying to have spiritual influence on. And maybe it's, an elder in our church, or maybe, and I try to get this different group of people, different ages, young people, et cetera. And so I'm always trying to write to think, okay, is this helping them? Is this helping? Would they get this? Would my neighbor who has no spiritual interest right now, would he's probably not going to hear this sermon anyway, but it helps me write with an edge if I can do it with specific people in mind. And I think I've just done it so long, I probably don't think about it. It comes naturally to me. But I think in every sermon, there's probably almost a part that there's that personal challenge that I'm trying to give, and the corporate challenge that I'm trying to give to us as a church family, and to remind us of why we do what we do and what our vision is. And I think that's just kind of, sometimes one of those will be heavier than the others, depending on what the sermon is, that it weights one way or the other.
Well, and I love that because, even in the message that, we shared a clip from, but the message is that I've, listened to you for years and years. You are a pastor, and I love that personal. And I never knew that you had the names of people as you were thinking and writing, but it makes total sense now when I think about, because someone who I think is so gifted organizationally, with vision, with building, with leadership. Sometimes the pastoring can not be there. And I just always feel that, and there's been times in my life where you've texted or you called, like you are just one of, in my opinion, one of the just healthiest examples of a lead pastor, of really kind of incarnating and embodying those two words. And I love it because it just comes out week after week in your preaching. And it's just something I respect deeply about you.
That's very kind, Steve. But I would, to be honest with you, I don't know that that's always been true of me. And I think, an area where God had to break me and grow me in was I had to go through some of my own brokenness in life and some of my own hurt. And, it's no secret, I went through a really rough divorce back in the 80s when, the woman I was married to fell in love with another guy and married the guy. And that was humbling and heartbreaking. And I hated that I had to go through that. And that was like, the 2x4. And there's been, a few other painful ministry experiences along the way. And I have felt like, some betrayal or woundedness or even abuse in certain circumstances. And, that when you go through that, it does soften you. And I just think, God had to break me of some of that in my own life, or I might be kind of command and control, strategic kind of person that wounds people because of where my leadership gift is. So
I love that. I mean, I obviously don't love that you went through any of that pain, but I love how you've allowed that to shape and form. And again, it just, you've done your work, and the fact that you've done your work means you're not passing on. I think my wife and I will always say is, someone asked us once, how do you know that you're going to be a good parent? And my quick answer is, well, my kids will go to counseling for different reasons than I go. Because I know I'm going to give them something, but I'm not given what I've been given, because I'm going to do that work. And so,
don't repeat that cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think that there are pieces, again, just of how you have shown up, how you have pastored, how you have led, and led with character. And that, for me, in this season of my life, I feel like more than ever, the pastors that I'm talking with, the pastors and the people that are listening to this podcast, it seems like so many people are just really leaning into this character conversation because they want to be someone who finishes the race. And you've been doing this 40 some years. Talk about just the character formation. And even I love this, because I hope everyone listening to this could hear, like in August, there's this kind of formational, and then it seems to go in September an invitational, and then it's back into kind of this, opportunity to go deeper, whether it's small groups, crossing the faith, but there's this intentionality. But you have that from a church leadership side, but I know you also have that from a personal side. What does that character formation look like most for you?
So when I was just starting in Vegas, like 25 years old, one of the, I look back at one of the most important books that I've ever read, and it's probably just because it was important at the time. What hit me at just the right time was an old book that Gordon MacDonald wrote on ordering your private world.
Yes.
And he talks in there, he uses the metaphor of a sinkhole. And he says, when you see these sinkholes appear in Florida or something, and a house disappears or a car disappears, it's like it happens suddenly. And his point is that didn't happen suddenly. There was something going on beneath the surface there for a long, long time. And then suddenly you see this flame out, this explosion, this sinkhole. And, he was talking about the interior of, a follower of Jesus's life, that we've got to work on the interior so that we can last for the long haul, and we don't have, that sinkhole effect spiritually in our life. And that book was just, like the right book at the right time, that helped me develop some practices and habits in my life, where I started journaling at that time. I know journaling doesn't work for everybody, but I'm a processor, and journaling really helps me to think, to pray, to reflect. I got more serious about regular Bible reading for soul nourishment, not just for sermon preparation. Yeah. And, that was just a very good thing in my life. So that, it was, 3 or 4 years later, when I went through the marriage crisis that I talked about, I didn't have to develop habits to get me through that time. I already had the habits there. And they served me well through that time. I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and I don't know how much, but like in the circles that I grew up in, he was kind of well-known, president of a Christian college and seminary, and just lived with integrity and authenticity. He was the same person at home that everybody saw in public. And when I was 14 years old, he died suddenly of a heart attack. And we were at our family cabin, and real primitive cabin up on a lake in Minnesota when that occurred. And, a few hours after he died, the family's grieving, we're packing, we're preparing. We lived in Illinois. We're getting ready for the 700-mile drive back home to prepare for his funeral. And Mom asked me if I'd go down the road. There was a little convenience store where we could buy milk and coffee and newspapers. Back in the day, we had newspapers over the summer, and they would just keep a tab. So she asked me if I'd go pay our bill that we'd had from the time we'd been there on vacation. And so I said, sure. And, I've not had a lot of times in my life where I felt like God spoke to me just like audibly, but I did that day. And maybe God knew I needed it that day. But, I was walking down that road or about a half mile away to this store. I remember everything about the tall pine trees on each side of the road. And what I was wearing, I had on a pair of plaid bell bottoms with cuffs about 3 inches thick and a maroon colored t-shirt. I may have only been 14 years old, but I had pretty good fashion sense. And it just hit me that day. And I think this was God speaking to me saying, Gene, what happened to your dad today is going to happen to every single person on the face of the earth. One day is going to be their last day on this planet. And there's only one thing that matters on that day. And that is, do they have a relationship with me? Have they walked with me, experienced the grace of my son? Unfortunately, my dad had, and I know where he was at. And I just sense God saying that day, if you'll put your hand in my hand, if you'll trust me with your life, I'm going to use your life to help people get ready for their last day on this planet and to live every day between now and then. And, even talking about it now, that's 46 years ago since that occurred, but it's as real to me as it happened yesterday. And, that calling, if you want to call it that's been the passion of my life, to just help people get ready for their last day. And I don't want to screw that up. And, my dad finished well, and, I'm 60 now. And, you would think, like when I was younger, I used to think, hey, when people get to that age or beyond, well, there's nothing that could happen to their character at that point because they've got this all dialed by then. And yet you and I, we see it all the time that sometimes, people blow it on the backside of their ministry and their backside of their years. And so I'm just really grateful to have a wife who keeps me humble and some great friends who speak into my life and have permission to speak into my life and who aren't enamored by what I do or because I'm a pastor. They just love me, whether I was pushing a broom or, and those have been real gifts, I think, that have helped me sustain for a long time. But it's still day by day, day by day.
Well, I just think, man, I've heard we have some mutual friends, but the legend of your dad, and just like you said, the character and the integrity, and I remembered reading an article a number of years ago, kind of detailing that story when you were 14, and I just can't imagine how proud your dad must be of you. Just the example that you've set, the ways that you've pastored, the people that you've raised up, the women and men, and just the ways that you didn't just bypass that kind of audible voice and invitation that God gave you on that dirt road, but have actually just put it into practice week after week, day after day, meeting after meeting, service after service. And again, just as someone who's on the outside, but has been a recipient of just the work that you've done and the ways that you've just carried on your father's legacy. It's just deeply, deeply moving to me, and just grateful for you. I want to go back to that journal piece though, real quick, because in this message, you mentioned that you actually journal your fears. And, I've heard people talk about like a gratitude journal, and that's, or like writing about their day. But I thought that was a really interesting piece, is that, you just kind of writing them out and can see them on paper. It's like they lose power. Talk about where that kind of came from, because I think it's a really just character development, because fear takes over. We don't make the best decisions based in fear. So yeah, talk about that.
Well, we do get in this cycle, and I talk in that sermon about how we go from, this is just the cycle the Israelites went through with Moses, from fear to sarcasm to imagining worst case scenarios, and you start catastrophizing everything. And I can do that just like anybody else, where, your mind just starts going, and you're traveling down roads that will, that hasn't occurred. Why do I keep going down those roads? And what I find is, when I have the discipline to sit down and just write about those fears out, like it dissipates. And sometimes they don't look as big when you put them on paper, you know?
Yes.
And then the other thing is it helps me reflect on, oh yeah, I remember a time I had a similar fear, or, you know, and well, God got me through that.
Yeah.
And God took me through that. And I don't know, there's just something about writing it out to me that helps it dissipate. I don't know, for some people that may reinforce it, but it does just the opposite for me.
Yeah.
It doesn't look as big.
Yeah. I love that. Just this simple. It doesn't look as big. Two more questions, and then I want to be really respectful of your time. The other one that I feel like the conversation I keep hearing from pastors is just around, you know, this year's just been, or 2020 has been such a year filled with criticism like they've never experienced before. You know, 50%, you know, even just whether it's a political divide, but, you know, some decisions, you know, whether to close, whether to regather, it's just 50%. Seems like there's just some frustration. What pastoral insights or wisdom would you give to, hey, how to handle criticism well? Any insight into that?
So, I mean, you know, I interned at Eastside 40 years ago this last summer when I first came. And so I've been in ministry a long time and seen a lot of ups and downs and mountains and valleys and experienced joys and, you know, deep sorrows. But I would say, and you're aware of some of my challenging years of ministry. This has been the most challenging year.
Wow.
This has been the most challenging year. And, you know, I think for many of us in ministry, you know, I'm like everybody else. I'm like you. I like to be liked.
Yeah. Yep.
And to know that, you know, this year, no matter what decision we made, no matter what path we went down, there's going to be a segment of people who are critical, who attack, etc. And, you know, I've thought about Moses many times this year, and, you know, he's got everybody against him. You know, the Egyptians are against him. Pharaoh's against him. You know, he's trying to do the best he can to lead the people, and the Israelites are just critical, no matter what he does. And, you know, it gives them water from a rock, and, you know, rain for manna to come from heaven, and a cloud to guide them by day and a pillar of fire by night. And they still gripe. And then it hits his own family.
Yeah.
And, you know, Miriam and Aaron, you know, his own brother and sister. And I reflect about, so why did he stay in the game? Because he couldn't do anything else. It was the call of God on his life. Wow. That's what he was called to do. And that helps me. I know it probably over spiritualizes it for some people, but it's like, what else am I going to do? I can't do anything else. This is the call. Yes. And, you know, in good times and bad times, and when it's easy and when it's hard. You know, I think about Jesus in John 5. You know, he says, I only try to please the one who sent me. And I think about, you know, if Jesus couldn't please everybody, who am I that I think I can? And so, you know, if I can put my head on the pillow at night, knowing that ultimately I'm going to be accountable to God for how I shepherded and led and pastored through all times, but through the COVID-19 crisis. And if I can just do it with the confidence, you know, I know I didn't do it perfect today, but I did it the best that I could today. That really helps me.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I've never thought about that from the Moses side. And then again, like, oh, it even hit his own family. That's beautiful. You know, it's kind of funny. And, you know, you interned 40 years ago at Eastside. You know, I went to Hope International University in Cal State Fullerton, and Eastside used to be right across the street. And so I would go to University Praise, you know, there, and, you know, Eastside, the former pastor, I would go over to his house, Graydon Jessup, and have some, he and his wife just mentored some students from HIU. And so Eastside's always had this kind of unique connection to even my own development. And then, you know, as I've kind of 20 some years since I was in Fullerton, you know, Eastside's expanded, and in La Habra, in East Redlands, even in out in Minnesota, Park Rapids, is that what it's? And beyond, there's a couple more campuses. how has it been just to lead in this season in different states, in different counties? What's been that like for you?
Well, first of all, because I interned at Eastside so many years ago, and it marked my life in so many ways. The pastor at that time was a guy by the name of Ben Merrill, who was just
Legend.
And served the church for 22 years, and I learned so much from him about preaching and leading, and so much of what I've done over the years really grew out of my time here. And the fact to be able to come back and to give back to a church who had built into me has been really a great joy. And it's just been kind of the funnest, freshest, most joy-filled ministry era of my life, in spite of challenges like 2020 have been. And, really, when I think about the multi-site thing, the thing that drives it is our vision to reach people.
Yeah.
And to make a difference. And so I don't care how many campuses we have. I don't care if it's an avenue, though, that will help me fulfill that call of God on my life, to help people prepare for their last day. That trips my trigger then. And then okay, how could God use that? And who could we reach? And what's going to be our strategy to do that? And so that's just really kind of the heartbeat behind that, and how it beats in me as a leader. We've set some even numerical goals in that, but that's just to get us moving and thinking about who can we reach. It just helps to bring out our best thinking and our best strategic planning, so that we just don't get comfortable with how things are in the status quo.
Yeah, I love that. And even when I was at Willow for a number of years, I oversaw evangelism, and I would go to different ministry areas and just ask, hey, how many people are you praying for from the junior high ministry to be baptized? How many are you praying? And for me, it was, gosh, I want a number that has me on my knees. That's has to be of God, has to, basically you step back and go, only God could have done this. I want to see that happen. And again, I know your same spirit, which I love. It's man, it just, when you have a God-sized dream, it requires a deep level of dependency. And like you talked about in that teach, an expectation of God's help. And so, Gene, thank you. Just thank you again for just who you are. If none of you are following along on the Eastside story, you should. If you're ever in Southern California on a weekend, just stop in. The worship's fantastic, but the preaching will just minister to you, and you'll just see a congregation that's fired up about reaching their friends and really seeing compassion unleashed locally and globally. And that's just a credit to the team that Gene has, the elders, and just the people that he's assembled. And so, man, thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks.
Let me just say, you're a world-class encourager, and I'm grateful for the times we get together are too infrequent, but I treasure every chance we have to connect, and really grateful for the opportunity to have the conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. And everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in to the Craft and Character podcast. Feel free, share this with a friend. You can go on iTunes. You can like it. You can leave a comment. But if there's ever any ways that I can serve you, don't hesitate. You can reach me by email, steve@steveryancarter.com. And we've got some incredible preaching cohorts coming up. You can learn more at craftandcharacter.com. And with that, I hope you we'll just think about some of those words and phrases and thoughts and ideas that Gene shared. And I pray that this week, as you kick off 2021, would truly be a blessing. And this season of ministry would truly be one that brings honor and glory to Christ. Much love, everyone. Grace and peace.